How in the world do you beat one of the hardest games ever made at level 1? Well, I'm going to show you. Whether you're looking for tips to tackle Elden Ring's most brutal challenges, or strategies to make the impossible seem possible, this guide is here to help. For this guide, I completed several runs with various restrictions, all at level 1. Some fights, you'll see, I'm incredibly strong. Some, I'm reasonably strong, and some, I'm pretty weak. I use status effects sometimes I don't. I do that so you can figure out for yourself what you think is a reasonable challenge that is achievable with your skill level. But do push yourself beyond what you think you're capable of. That's what makes a challenge challenging. I will be going through each of the Remembrance bosses in this game, and I'll give you some strategies and tips to take them down. But this won't be an exhaustive moveset breakdown. Elden Ring combat is incredibly complex, and there are a ton of options to take on the challenges ahead. If I went through literally everything you can do in this game, this video would be 3 months and 2 days long. So I'll just be showing you what has worked for me. In the previous video, I talked about why you might want to take on this challenge. Now, I'm going to talk about how. If you missed that video and you already know why you want to do this challenge, to quickly catch you up, in that video we created our weird little guy, we got our physic, some tears, got the Radagon source seal, and parried Margit to dust. Now, we're ready for what's next, and here is where we get into the real meat of Elden Ring, the open world, because we have so many options. Anyone who has played through the game more than once knows all about this step. You need to get all the stuff you want for your build. This is the setup, and it can be a slog. Depending what and how much you want, this could take you a while before you even kill anything. I'm going to run through a ton of options that are good for RL1. It's not everything, and you don't need to take everything I recommend. Just take what you need. First, let's chat talismans, because you've got another slot with Margit dead and buried, and you've got some options. You can pick up the green turtle talisman with a stone sword key. As I mentioned, stamina is really important. Using this talisman can free up your physics slot. Alternatively, you can also pick up the green turtle shield. It gives you added equip load, but you don't even need to have it equipped to have the benefit. You can just have it on your back and be a cool turtle. Next, the axe talisman is great because it can stack with your cracked tier for charged heavies. You can also pick this up without killing anything. Lastly, I recommend the blue dancer charm. If you plan on being naked or close to it, this is your best option. Most things are going to kill you in a couple hits anyway, so sacrificing your armor doesn't really matter. Light roll is going to be very handy, so blue dancer suits that well. Just be aware that the benefits start to not be worth it at around 15 equipment load, so if you're using a heavier weapon, it might not be worth it. You will have to kill this giant to get it, but it's pretty easy. Just charge heavies at his feet, and you'll get him in no time. The other really helpful thing to start is to get the bubble tier. You can get it from killing the Tree Man and the Weeping Peninsula. This is amazing for this challenge because unless you're playing defensive, everything is probably going to kill you in one hit. This essentially gives you an extra life if you are going glass cannon with no defensives. You probably won't need this now because we can still take some hits without issue, but eventually this will be really helpful. If you're itching to get going right away on this challenge and you don't want a crazy long setup process, head to Castle Morn and go see Edgar. And what you're going to want to do is end his life. Just end it. Get him out of here. Because he gives you a Banished Knight's Halberd at +8 right off the bat. That's huge. The Halberd also does Pierce and has an amazing moveset for poking enemies at range. It will also save you running around and getting upgrade stones, so if you want to take on Godrick right now, you are more than strong enough. But before we head there, I'm going to advise you to give yourself some more options. Here's how to do that. First, grab enough stones to upgrade your basic starting club to +6. Next, we're going to skip Stormvale Castle completely. If you don't already know this, you can head down this little pathway here and completely bypass both the castle and Godrick. Godrick is actually completely optional in this game. All you need is 2 great runes. Where you get them is completely up to you. I will come back for Godrick, but for now, there's things that we need. We want to go all the way to Raya Lucaria Crystal Tunnel and sprint to the boss. The Crystallian is super slow and weak to strike damage. So choose your moment and then get a big jump heavy or charge until it's staggered. You get the Smithing Stone Bell from this, which gives you unlimited Smithing Stones 1 and 2 from the shop, so you can upgrade as many +6 weapons as you want. And that gives you a lot of freedom to try different weapons without locking you in. One thing you should really keep in mind at all times is damage type. Just as strike damage was extremely strong against that Crystallian, other weapon types are similarly strong against other bosses. If you wonder why I'm doing so much damage in some of my videos, it's usually because of this. So I'd recommend you pick up one option for strike, pierce, and slash at all times. Standard is an option too, but there's not many bosses that are weak to that specifically, so I'd stick with those 3. Let's talk infusions and Ashes of War. You're going to want to pick up the Whetstone Knife, and you can also pick up the Red Hot Wet Blade all the way in Caelid where the festival is. Head there now before the festival starts if you don't want to miss it before things kick off. Elemental infusions split your damage. And although the base damage is really high, negations and defenses are taken from both sides of the split. But if a boss has low negations, then split damage is a really good idea. You can boost your elemental damage with things like the Scorpion Charms, which you can pick up later, or the Elemental Tears, which you can find from the Tree Men. These are incredibly strong for bosses with elemental weaknesses. You can also pick up the Glintstone Wetblade right now in the Academy, which is really helpful all the way through the game, but you will have to take out the big doggy in the Academy. This guy should be totally fine with a +8 weapon, and his attacks won't one-shot you. Pick your moments when he does a big jump on you and find the moves that look safe but aren't. It doesn't have much health at all, so it's absolutely doable. He can be pretty mean with how he combines ranged magic with bite, but you should be able to get him after a wee bit of the old trial and error. You can pick up the Wet Blade right here after you get him down, which will give you not only magic infusion, but also cold. Cold is crazy good all the way through the game. While you're here, you can also get a very helpful armor piece. Not this one, that's mine. Spring over the rooftops and fall down here, and you get this headpiece, which gives you extra dexterity. This comes in handy to wield some weapons at the cost of a little bit of max health. In terms of other wet blades you can get the Iron Wet Blade, and that can be picked up when you get into Stormvale later, but for the most part, standard infusions are going to be better than heavy or keen most of the time because we don't have the stats for scaling. The other wet blades are locked off from us for the minute, so those are our options for now. Ashes of War. You have some really great options. First, Golden Vow. It's crazy good, it's easy to get. It gives you a 10% buff to all your damage for a little under a minute. And the best thing is, it's an aura buff, meaning you can buff yourself with it and still get the buff if you use a different weapon. So one of the best strategies in this game is to put Golden Vow on a dagger just for this purpose. It frees you up to use a different ash on your main weapon and still get the buff. It's a no-brainer. Another big one is Crag Blade. This one gives an increase to your damage and stagger damage. It's also a weapon buff, meaning it stacks with Golden Vow, making it strong in pretty much all situations. While we're talking buffs, Flame Grant Me Strength is an incantation that is easily picked up near Fort Gale and increases both fire damage and physical damage by 20% for a short period. This is a body buff, meaning you can combo it with both Golden Vow and Crag Blade for a massive buff. Alternatively, you can use the Blood Boil Aromatic if you find the recipe in the Shaded Castle a bit later. This is a 30% buff for a longer period. The Uplifting Aromatic is also a really good option to be more defensive. It'll only give you a 10% damage boost, but it will also help you absorb a hit. But you won't be able to obtain the crafting materials until much later on in Nokron. People swear by these, but I don't have the patience to farm them, and I never feel like I need the damage enough to hunt them down. But if you want to be as strong as you can possibly be, these are good to pick up. To pair with Flame Grant Me Strength, you can use the Ash of War Flaming Strike. Flaming Strike is incredibly good for enemies weak to fire or with low negations. This not only does a very strong initial attack, but leaves a buff that increases all future attacks for a set time. My final two recommendations for Ashes of War are ones that I would absolutely recommend to anyone that wants an easier time with this challenge. You do have to kill a couple bosses, but it is absolutely worth it. These are some of the buggiest enemies in the game. Their horses are so jank, and they will frequently run away and just forget about you. he'll give you Giant's Hunt. If you saw my earlier video, you maybe saw me talking about the combo potential of this move. This move is crazy, especially against NPC enemies. You can chain these infinitely until either you run out of MP or they die. This is, without a doubt, one of the most important things to pick up on this run. It will come in handy. In order to help your MP consumption and keep you Giants hunting, you can pick up the Asher War Scarab near the bridge to Godrick's Great Rune a bit later. You can also pick up the Carrion Filigree Crest Talisman from EG. If you come here at night, you'll find another Cavalry Knight. He can be finished off in exactly the same way. He's tough, but keep at it. After you defeat this one, you'll get Ice Spear, and this move, it can really carry you. If you like a ranged playstyle, this is crazy. I went straight to Gowrie and got Commander O'Neill down for the Dexterity Heirloom. It's wild. Put it on Cold Infusion and chuck these at range, and not only will it do crazy damage, it will stagger bosses really quickly. It's fantastic if you don't mind a little cheese. Before we talk about which weapons to use these ashes on, let's say we want to be even stronger. Let's get the other half of the Dectus Medallion, talk to Height beforehand if you want to do his questline, which you should do for important upgrade stones later. Kill the Knight on the way up for Bloody Slash, that's going to come in handy, then go up the big lift. Head all the way over to the sealed tunnel to get the Smithing Stone Bell 2 very easily. This is unlimited stones all the way up to plus 12. But the real power spike this early is Somber Weapons, and Somber Weapons are much easier to upgrade because they have a max of 10, not 25, and they only require 1 stone per upgrade. The trade-off is, of course, they aren't infusible. That makes them really good early in the game, but less so later. That being said, less good doesn't mean bad. Some Somber Weapons can comfortably take you all the way to the end of the game if you want. If you want a Somber Weapon, you can head up from the Crystal Tunnel past the secret door to find EG. And EG can give you Somber Stones all the way to plus 4. If you want even more power than that, head back up the lift to Old Atlas Tunnel, and you can find some Somber 5s and 6s around there. So let's talk about weapon options. There are a ton of options at RL1. I'd recommend focusing your higher level stones on 1 infusible weapon and 1 Somber Stone weapon of a different damage type. That way you always have a little bit of variety. For Strike, the meta weapon that a lot of first timers on this challenge use is the Iron Ball. You can pick it up by killing Boggart. Make sure to do the Raya questline if you want the teleport to Volcano Manor. If you do want to kill Boggart, keep in mind if you do him in here and not later, you'll lose the ability to buy unlimited boiled crabs. Boiled crabs are a massive boost to your defense. It's a good idea to keep him alive until he moves on to the next location. These are amazing weapons. Their power comes from the charged heavies, which are super fast and do massive stagger damage. You can absolutely cheese a bunch of bosses with this just by spamming this move. I would, however, recommend having another option in your back pocket. They are amazing, yes, but the range of them is incredibly limiting. With some bosses you do tend to whiff, even when you're directly in their face. Personally, I find these weapons really frustrating, but they are undeniably very strong. I, however, tend to prefer the Stone Club because it has a more varied moveset and is also really, really strong. You can get it from farming this guy near Celia Hideaway. For a somber weapon, I'd highly recommend this Goofy Finger. It may look silly, but it's actually incredible. And you can get it very easily. You may need some extra flask charges to make your way down here, but just spam roll and open the chest and it's yours. This is strong all the way through the game, it does great stagger, and it looks funny. It's perfect, one of my favorites. Slash damage is amazing because a good chunk of the trickiest bosses are weak to it. The Uchigatana is what I used for my first level 1 run. Unsheath is a fantastic Asher War for pretty much every situation. It also has native bleed, and it can be gotten really early without fighting anything over in the death-touched catacombs. The Grave Scythe, great high damage weapon that you can use with low stat requirements. This is a great RL1 pick. The slash weapon I recommend most though is a weapon I'm sure you're familiar with, the Bloodhound's Fang. It's a really strong pick for somber weapons and you can take it all the way to the end of the game pretty handily. It does have a high dex requirement, but you can use it just fine with the Glintstone Mask. The weapon is incredibly strong for several reasons. First, crazy base damage. Also, it has bleed. Also, the Asher War gives iframes, making it essentially a counter Also, it has a hidden 10% buff to jump attacks. This weapon is nuts. The craziest thing is it is one of the only somber weapons that can be buffed by greases or by blood flame blade. You do need a bit of faith to use it, but you can get that from a couple armor pieces that are really easy to get. This destroys a good chunk of the bosses in the game and is an incredibly strong option to take on this challenge. Pierce is really good. Pierce damage does extra damage when you are countering an enemy that is mid-combo, which ideally you'll be doing a lot. It can be boosted even further with the Spear Talisman. If you are prioritizing your stones on one damage type, Pierce is a pretty safe bet. The Ancestor Rapier is near the Shaded Castle. You'll have to kill an NPC to get it. It has Native Scarlet Rot, which is a fantastic strong damage over time effect. You can put Bleed on it for a combination of burst and damage over time, but what I like to do is be a complete degenerate and put Poison on it for double dot damage. You can also pick up the Kindred of Rot's Exaltation in the Seawater Cave, and it stacks really nicely with some tools we'll get later on. Clayman's Harpoon is one of my favorite weapons in the game. You can find them down the well from these barnacled bozos. This weapon is really unique because it has native split damage, but it's infusible, meaning if you fuse it magic or cold, you're getting extra damage. That makes Clayman's Harpoon one of the best weapons for a cold infusion and a fantastic option for Ice Spear. If you want to play a patient ranged playstyle with Ice Spear, this is the one, but the obvious Pierce choice is the Serpent Hunter. It's fantastic because it has no stat requirements, meaning you don't even need Soar Seal to wield it, and it has crazy base damage. To get it though, we're going to have to do a couple things. Even if you don't want the Serpent Hunter, if you do want to get as strong as you can early on, you're going to want to follow these steps. First, you need to get to Volcano Manor. While you're here, if you do the first contract, which you can do pretty easily with a bit of giants hunting, you can get Assassin's Gambit from Bernthal here. This is incredibly helpful as it allows us to stealth past enemies, which is really good for navigating certain areas. Head into the Legacy Dungeon and sprint past everything. You can use Assassin's Gambit to help you out, but it's pretty easy to unlock the shortcut if you follow this path. Once you have, we're ready to take on a pretty tough customer, the Godskin Noble. There's a couple ways you can do this. You can fight him for real for the extra challenge, or you can cheese the hell out of him. If you want the challenge, I recommend that you parry him. This can be great practice for the Godskin duo fight, which will come up later. You can use your Rickety Shield parry if you want, but there are a couple other strong options that will make the process easier. You can find Golden Parry over here. You need to sneak up behind on the rooftops, but it's a pretty easy grab, and Golden Parry will allow you to parry at range at the cost of MP, so it's a great option if you want to play a bit safe. The option I really recommend though is Carrion Retaliation. Sprint past all the fingies to find Loretta. Loretta is a really good fight to practice your parries on. She isn't able to be riposted after a parry, but she'll be stunned long enough to get a big charged heavy on her. Many of the horse riding mini-bosses, like the Draconic Tree Sentinels, have a similar moveset to Loretta, so it's great to practice on her. Loretta is very weak to lightning. You can pick up the Asher War Lightning Slash from a Scarab near Lane-Dell. This one's great for anyone weak to lightning, as it works similarly to Flaming Strike with the extra base damage. She can sometimes combine her ranged and melee options, and it can be tricky to dodge, but for the most part, Loretta is fairly reasonable. Once that's done, you can head up and meet my wife if you want, then head down over here to talk to this weird dude. You can buy the ash from him here. Carrion Retaliation is amazing because it gives more parry frames than the regular parry with no cost to MP. It also allows you to reflect magic for pretty respectable damage. This is really good on Noble because not only can you parry most of his attacks, but you can reflect his fireballs, which he will do a ton at range. He's pretty tough, and it's the first challenge where anything he does probably will one-shot you. Taking him on at this point, as we are, is completely optional, obviously, but it's still absolutely doable. At half health, he's going to explode, so back off. Then what you're going to need to do is to get behind a pillar. This part's really annoying, because if you choose a pillar that is too close or too far for some reason, he'll go through the pillar, killing you. It can be really frustrating and totally janky. Let it be. No game is perfect. This fight's a weird one. It's still absolutely doable. While he's rolling like this, you can, if you're very careful, get some easy damage off him. You'll have to be very careful which moves you do this with. Jump heavies are good because they typically don't move you forward. That's pretty much all you need to beat this guy. And if you're wanting to get as strong as you possibly can be, as early as you can, this is how to do it. But if you're having a great deal of trouble, you can absolutely do this the easy way and cheese the hell out of him. The Noble is really weak to sleep. So we need sleep pots. You can get a recipe from a cookbook in a graveyard in Limgrave. To make them, you'll need cracked pots. You can purchase some from Kale and find 3 in Jarburg, which should be more than enough. The next thing we need are the flowers, and this is the big thing with sleep pots. You can find these flowers really easily in the open world, but they don't respawn, meaning they are a limited supply. And that can make using sleep pots pretty stressful, because we're going to need a stockpile for when we take on the far more menacing Godskin duo down the line. The good news is that if you have access to the DLC, you have a new, much better option, which is unlimited and thankfully takes the pressure off. Get a slash weapon and Bloodflame Blade. Bloodhound's Fang is the easy option. I went with the claws for no other reason than they looked cool. Chuck a pot. 1 good hit should be enough. It's a good idea to chuck it after he throws a fireball. Once he has that purple line through him, he's good to go. Just charge heavies, he'll stagger, but just keep charging. At half health, pot him again, go back and do the same. And it's done. It's easy. Your biggest roadblock to becoming overpowered super early, and he's dead. You can also do the same strategy with the Godskin Apostle if you want Millicent's prosthesis. You'll have to get the item to continue the questline from the Shaded Castle first, which you can do pretty easily without killing anything. But if you do, you can potentially get an amazing talisman, which gives you 5 dex and a multi-hit buff. You'll just have to do a very bad thing, so I leave it to you. Back to Volcano Manor, it's now a clear run to the Serpent Hunter. But before you do, you can pick up the Dagger Talisman. That'll boost your critical damage. You can also find Royal Knight's Resolve, which is a fantastic ash for when you really need to pick your moment and do 1 massive attack. But the real reason we're here is to grab this Somber Stone 7. It's really important because it's the only stone at this level that we have access to without getting any great runes. And now that we have it, we can get insanely strong. Grab the Serpent Hunter, and if you want, you can upgrade this weapon all the way to 9 right now. Grab 8 from the Scarab and Kaled, and then 9 here, done. Almost max. We'll get to number 10 very soon, but first we need to actually get a great rune. Before you leave Kaled though, you can also get some pretty high regular smithing stones here as well. Head to Stormvale and talk to Old Mate, but ask him to open the main gate. This will give you a faster path to the boss, but it's a bit tricky. If you have Assassin's Gambit, you can stealth your way past to this grace point, or you can absolutely just sprint past everything. You may just have to do some tricky swervies and spam roll, but you will get it eventually. Worst case scenario, you could always just take the normal way around to the side, but that's also a little hairy. Before you head into Godrick, you can pick up this very helpful weapon. This is the Misericord. It has the highest crit damage in the game. It is very light and easy to pocket as a sidearm, meaning you can use your big old Serpent Hunter or whatever weapon you've decided to stick with for now and stagger the boss. Then swap to the Misericord for big riposte damage. This is a really fantastic strategy, and if you really want to optimize your damage, it's a great thing to try and get used to. Finally, you can grab the Claw Talisman. This talisman gives you a damage increase to jumping attacks, and it stacks with the jump buff from Bloodhound's Fang. You can stack it even more with the Raptor set from Sage's Cave for a further 10%. This is extremely strong. We're good to go. Setup phase, for the most part, is done. Finally. I know that was long, sorry, but that's Elden Ring, man. The setup phase is a big part of the game and especially important at level 1 to give you the most options. So now that you have all those options, let's use them. Let's take a look at Godrick's resistances. He's pretty weak to all damage types, but has good negations for elemental damage. That means split damage isn't the best idea. That being said, it's not terrible. This doesn't really matter that much at this point in the game. He also has really low status resistances, so poison and cold are great options. If you followed this guide and played from home, you've already faced challenges that are much tougher than Godrick. If you did Margit with no upgrades and parried him as I suggested, and you're sitting here now with a +9 Serpent Hunter, it's going to be a lot easier. When Godrick phase changes, he will do this super long animation where you can just wail on him. He will take less damage at a certain point and you'll want to move out of the way because his downswing can hit you. When second phase starts, you can sprint right up to him as he's spraying his fire and charge some heavies. With a stronger weapon, this can pretty much skip his second phase completely. Godrick has a lot of get-off-me attacks. The most infamous one, of course, is the Storm Assault move. He'll have a lot of moves that look like big punishes, but this move is very fast, So if you've only just finished a jump heavy and he starts that attack, you are probably going to get hit by it. It's best to pick your moments, get one big hit in, and then get out. There's a really good technique you can practice here that will help you all the way through the game. Attacks in this game are based on positioning. So if Godrick starts his combo and I run out, if I run far enough away, he will stop, because otherwise he'll just be swinging at the air. But if I run out and then run back in a bit so that I'm close enough to make him finish that combo, then he will have less time to start his next attack. So instead of rolling out, try sprinting. Often you'll not only cover more distance, but have more time to get in with your own punishes. A jumping attack after a sprint is much, much faster than one after a roll. Your big punish windows are when he jumps on you after Storm Assault. You have more than enough time for a charged heavy here. When he does I command thee kneel, you can jump the final shockwave for a big punish. In the second phase, you can jump heavy the second and third shockwave. Other than that, Godrick is pretty simple. He's still an Elden Ring boss though, and you're level 1, so if you are having trouble, give it time. This game is known to be hard for a reason. Let it be. You will get him though, and when you do, it'll feel pretty damn good. Great rune secured, and you are still level 1. Now that Godrick's done, there's a few things that we can do. At this point in the game, it is a good idea to knock off some side quests. First off, Alexander, you can either grease up this big boy and follow that quest line to the end for that talisman that gives you a plus 15% damage to Ashes of War at the end of the game, or you can kill him now to get the one that buffs them by 10%. You can also do Rogier's quest line if you like. He'll eventually give you the Spellblade set, which will give you a nice boost to some Ashes of War. And you'll also want to quickly pop into Fear to make sure she starts to get out of the round table hold if you want to fight Fortissax later. Don't forget to eat the Baldarkan Blessing so you don't have that health debuff. I see this everywhere. Take that consumable, rest at the grace point so it goes away. Next is Vare. After Godrick, he'll move to the Church of the Rose in Liurnia. First, he'll give you some fingies and you'll need to invade. Because you're level 1, PvP might be harder to come by, and you'll need to invade 3 times. If you can't find anyone, or you're not playing with online enabled, you do have another option. Head up to the plateau and find the summon sign over here. Each time you take on this fight, you'll use up one of those consumable fingies, meaning if you die too many times, you will have to hunt for some more. And this is where Giant's Hunt comes very much in handy. You've got the Great Stars weapon, which is a fantastic great hammer with native bleed. You can power stance this weapon with a second Great Stars in a chest nearby. Then, you'll need to speak to Vare to proceed to the next step. You'll need to go to the 4 belfries to head back to the start of the game to advance the quest further. You will have to take on the Scion here, but he should really be no trouble with an upgraded weapon. Make sure to get big punishes in when he's phase changing. Once he's done, head on back to where it all began, get a bit of blood on your napkin, and before you head off, get the item needed for Nefeli a bit later. Then head back to Vare to finish things. You'll be rewarded with the pathway to Mohg. You can get some high-level smithing stones around here, which are important to pick up, but what we really need is through this cave. You'll need to open this chest in front of this massive crowd. You'll probably die, but if you do, it'll still be open, so you can just run back and grab the contents and die again. You'll be rewarded with your final Somber Stone, meaning you can completely max out your Somber weapon right now if you wanted to. You'll definitely want to do Yura's questline. It's pretty simple with a bit of Giants hunting, and it will reward you with Raptor of the Mists, which I really recommend you give a go if you haven't already. You can follow that questline to Altus and finish this incredibly annoying NPC off. Watch for her dragon roars. She'll give you a very important tier for Mohg down the line. The last questlines I'd recommend you take on now are Nefeli Lu, and if you haven't already yet, Kenneth Height. If you finish both these questlines, you'll eventually get some max level ancient smithing stones to upgrade later. You won't get them until Morgott, but it's not a bad idea to knock those out now that you have that item to advance the questline. You'll also get 1/2 of the Haligtree medallion while you're here, and that is necessary if you are doing an all remembrance run or you want access to some of the extra resources in the consecrated snowfields. While you're here, head outside and find the scarab beetle. Kill this guy for Vow of the Indomitable. this is going to help us very soon. Last thing you might want to do is you can head through this cave to visit Latenna to again set up another max level stone for later. And that's that. We're ready to get our next Great Rune. If you're not worrying about an All Remembrance run, you only need 2 Great Runes to progress the story. We've already got 1 from Godrick, so that leaves Rennala, Rykard, and Radahn. Of these 3, I'd recommend Rennala or Rykard for now, because Radahn will be easier to get down with the extra talisman slots we'll get later. Of these 2, Rykard is a much more fun fight at level 1, I think, but Rennala can be much more easily melted. I'll go through them both now, pick whichever you fancy. Rennala is really weak to every physical damage type but strike. She's also weak to all status effects but really strong against magic, which suggests cold isn't a great option. The difference between this fight and Godrick is that Rennala is infinitely more annoying the longer the fight drags on. You'll get a certain amount of time after you pop 3 golden bubbles and Rennala falls down before you need to back off and wait for your turn again. This can really extend the fight time out, which is a problem because this phase gets really lethal as things start to fall from the sky and you start catching books to the side of the head. Not to mention, she has the worst runback out of any of the Remembrance bosses. It's not bad, obviously, in comparison with the other games in the series, but it's still the worst, so something to take into consideration. Unless you're going specifically for a low damage run, I'd recommend upgrading your weapon enough so that you can get it to phase 2 in at least 2 cycles, if not in the first one. Or you can just use a combination of status effects to get a massive burst of damage. In phase 2, she'll always start with this Comet Azure kind of move. Just head right in her face and charge her heavy. It'll go right over your head every single time. Keep on her and poke with quick R1s to interrupt her spells. You do need to respect the summons. Well, some of them. The troll and the dogs aren't so bad. The dragon actually isn't so bad either because it will pretty much just breathe fire right over your head, so it seems much scarier than it actually is. The one you really have to worry about, though, is the Bloodhound Knight. He's an absolute menace. If he pops in, just sprint away until he disappears. It's not worth trying to keep up the pressure while he's around. He's too fast. There is an alternative, though. You can buy bewitching branches from one of the merchants in Liurnia, and that will help you charm certain kinds of enemies. The Bloodhound Knight, even as a summon, is one of those enemies. It might be a bit trickier to do than just to whack away at her with a maxed out Serpent Hunter, but it definitely has more style points. One thing you want to very quickly do before Rykard is to put Vow the Indomitable on your rickety shield. Rykard is one of the bosses in this game that has an attack that can't be dodged with the normal roll alone and do need a specific solution to be avoided. So what you're going to want to do is practice switching from one-handed to two-handed very quickly so that you can cast Vow on command on this specific move, the Earthquake. You have a bunch of time before you need to actually press the button, so it's not really a reflexes test. You just need to get in the habit of doing it with a certain timing, which is just late enough for the move to last the duration of the Earthquake. Then, you need to swap back to two-handed for the damage. If you don't feel comfortable swapping backwards and forwards, you can just stay one-handed the whole time, but you will sacrifice a lot of damage and stagger if you do. There are other options to deal with this move, but this one I've found is definitely the most reliable. You may hate that you are required to bring this specific Ash to deal with this attack, and you do need to use a shield for this fight. That's the game. It's not perfect, but saying that, after I made peace with it, I actually began to really enjoy this playstyle of bringing out the shield to block that specific attack. It becomes the gimmick in this gimmick fight in the same way the Serpent Hunter is, and it forces you into a different playstyle that I find is really refreshing. Some might not. It does limit your options, especially at RL1, but I don't think it needs to be dreaded in the same way that some people make it out to be. This is totally fine. The fight is completely okay with an unupgraded Serpent Hunter, so I'd consider just using it as is, but obviously if you have already upgraded it to the max, you will just do more damage. You won't be melted as fast as Rennala, but it's still a big boost. For the most part, I think getting quick R1 pokes off is actually better than spamming bigger attacks because you'll get in more hits. The third attack in the chain often does a lot of damage too. The Ash of War will stun him twice, once in phase 1 and again in phase 2. As long as you hit him with the first attack, the follow-up is guaranteed and he'll be stunned long enough to get a follow-up attack in after. I save the Ash of War for after I get my first stagger so that I can really maximize that window. Rykard has a couple combos that will extend depending on what you do, and this is a really good lesson for a lot of bosses. Before I talked about positioning and combos, and Rykard has that when he lunges at you in phase 1. He goes for a bite once, and then sometimes a second time, and sometimes a third one. But he'll often take these extensions when you decide to be aggressive and punish when it's not safe. You just have to wait a fraction of a second, really. As soon as he starts to pull his head back, that means he's not going for that second or third hit, so you are free to attack him. He has some slow combos in phase 2 where you can get lots of little hits in between his sword swipes, and you'll really want to do that to optimize your damage and keep up that stagger bar. There's a lot going on in phase 2, and eventually there will be so many skulls and fire and lava craziness that it will become quickly very overwhelming. But I found even with a +0 Serpent Hunter, the fight never dragged out long enough to get unmanageable. In this fight, pretty much everything will start to kill you in one hit, so you have a much lower margin of error compared with Rennala and Godrick. If you're just doing mandatory bosses and you want an easier time, then fighting Rennala for the Great Rune is the way. Rykard, though, is my guy card. You'll be soon fighting many more bosses that will one-shot you, so unless you're going for a really defensive playstyle, I'd recommend getting used to it. Whether you got Rennala or Rykard or both, you now have 2 Great Runes. So talk to Enya at the round table for an extra talisman pouch. Juicy. Let's go through a few options for that slot. First, you're going to want to go to the Lux Ruins in Altus and bonk this big lady. She has super low health, so if you have a well-upgraded weapon, it should be no problem. She'll give you the Ritual Sword Talisman. It's a 10% damage increase to all attacks while you're at full HP. At level 1, you're going to be at full HP pretty much all the time, because if you're not at full HP, you're probably dead. The next option is for the true daredevils. First, we need the Sacred Blade Ash of War, near the Third Church of Marika. This is like Flaming Strike, but for holy damage. You can get the Sacred Scorpion Charm from Anastasia to up that damage even more. Next, go to Leonia at night and fight the Deathbird. These guys are a menace, but totally fine with Sacred Blade. You can even stay at range and fire them off. They can be frustrating, but if you're patient, you can totally get them down. This one gives you the Red Feather Branch Sword. Up in North Altus, you can get the Twin Bird Kite Shield. These items have a stackable effect, which is to give you more damage at low percent. Together, they give you a whopping 25% damage increase. Huge. To proc this effect, the most common way is to use Bloody Slash, which we got earlier. Put it on a dagger and spam it until you're low and it procs. Big damage. This is the best way to take advantage of a glass cannon playstyle. Now, we're going to need to head into Lane Dell, and this is where I got to my first big wall, the Draconic Tree Sentinel. On my first RL1 run, this guy gave me a lot of trouble. I recommend Carrion Retaliation. He has a moveset very similar to Loretta, which is why I recommended parrying on that fight. You can also reflect the fireballs for really big damage, and if you're at range, he'll just keep spamming them. If you're not using Carrion Retaliation, you can roll in after each fireball to get in a pretty easy poke. The Draconic Tree Sentinel is strong against slash damage, so taking pierce or strike damage is the way to go. Like Loretta, he isn't able to be riposted, but you can still get big damage after the parries with a charged R2, followed by a jump heavy. You'll get a couple opportunities to get free damage at the start of the fight and in the phase change. Be aware that some attacks have shockwaves on the ground. His attacks will be different depending on which side of him you're on. If you're trying to parry, stick to the side with his weapon. If not, try to stick to his shield side. His attacks are much easier to dodge and punish. He can be really tough, but if you have a max level Somber weapon at this point, he will be no problem. Once you get him down, congratulations Tarnished, you are in the mid game. That's right, Tarnished. Ooh, feels good, doesn't it? Level 1 and in the pretty city. But we've got a long way to go yet. First, head across the rooftops and you'll find this creepy mask for a bit of free faith. And then double back past the big tree and light the grace. Nearby in the old round table hold, you can find the sanctified wet blade for sacred and lightning infusion. You can also find the hammer, which is another great strike weapon. Nearby, you can kill the omen killer for the omen smoke mask. This is a fantastic headpiece for extra strength, and it has a low equip load. The other thing we really need to pick up here is by the Colosseum. This is the talisman for anyone wanting to play more defensively. Ritual Shield. It's a really great talisman when you're learning bosses, as it keeps you in the fight while you're still learning to dodge. I wouldn't go past it if you want more survivability. The other important thing to pick up if you like using the Iron Ball is absolutely the best level 1 weapon in the game, the Star Fists. It does what the Iron Ball does, but with native bleed. It's crazy good. At this point, you can go down to the subterranean Shunning grounds, and that can give you some really important upgrade stones if you want to upgrade your smithing stone weapon. The Shunning grounds can be really tough to navigate at RL1, so just follow this path. This big horny dude will jump down. If you try to attack, more of them will follow, so just run around him while he's jumping and go up the ladder. Open these doors, and then the lever for the shortcut. If you keep going around, then you'll eventually reach this other big horny guy, and this guy always gave me trouble, but it turns out you can just Metal Gear Solid right past him with the crouch and go up the ladder without him realizing. I had no idea stealth was in the game until I tried a level 1 run. There are a ton of enemies you can just sneak right past, including the dreaded Fire Knights in the DLC. Try this if you're really having trouble getting past an enemy. Metal Gear Solid doesn't work here. You're going to have to do a mad dash. You're going to make your way here for a grace point for safety. You'll then need to do a bit of a kamikaze run here and run around the lobster area for some more smithing stones, another Somber 7, and Mohg's Shackle. This will come in handy. Then head back up to the grace point and follow this path. You can get some smithing stone 7s here and also an 8 around these tunnels. Then drop into this hole. Be prepared for the ambush. Mini Mohg is here. You can get him now, with or without the shackle, to get access to the Deeproot Depths. That means we don't have to take care of the Valiant Gargoyles, which is a godsend. We won't be able to get there until after Morgott though, so up to you if you want to do that now. Unlike real Mohg, Mini Mohg is immune to status effects, so no bleed, but if you have a fully upgraded Somber weapon at this point like I do with the Serpent Hunter here, he's no problem. It's a good idea to use the shackle strategically for staggers. You have 2 uses of it. So try to get 1 charged heavy in, then shackle, do enough hits to get a stagger, riposte, and do it again. He should be pretty close to being done at that point. Some things to be aware of with Mohg. When he puts his fork in the ground, be careful of the shockwave when he pulls it out. You're totally fine to strafe it and punish it, just make sure you're out of the range. You can also strafe past his fire hand move, but watch for the swing that follows. Other than that, you really just need to make sure you're getting quick R1s in between his attacks, as well as after. Some attacks have different timings, and you can actually squeeze in bigger punishes. This Fire Claw move is a delay. Don't roll the initial swipe, instead wait a beat, and then roll when it explodes. Usually, if you move back from the fire, that will trigger him to do the charge move, which is very easy to dodge and punish if you just roll forward. And that's about it for the Shunning grounds. So let's head straight up to Golden Godfrey. He's weak to both pierce and lightning, so an infusible weapon with lightning slash would go really well here. When you enter, his first move will often be him jumping in the air, and it's a really great opportunity to get a quick charge off if you roll at the right time. When he does the stomp, you can jump it and get a quick attack in. If you do a jump heavy though, you'll likely not get enough time to recover unless it's a lighter weapon. You can also strafe a good deal of his moves for bigger punishes. You'll be very stamina starved in this fight because a lot of his punishes are between his attacks. Total Talisman or Physic is really good here to stay aggressive. Once he's down, you will be rewarded with your last Talisman pouch. Now, do you want to clear just the mandatory bosses and then roll credits, or do you want to get all of them? If you do just want to roll credits, feel free to skip ahead to the next mandatory boss, which is Morgott, because we're going to do a whole bunch of optional stuff now. First up, Radahn. Radahn can be frustrating because of the gauntlet of ranged attacks he will do at you before you can even start the fight. You can bypass it if you go back and then forward, which bugs him out and transitions him into melee mode, but you still have to wait ages before his AI figures out what is going on and heads towards you. This is especially annoying in the learning process because you can often spend a minute or so getting to him only to die immediately. The best way to avoid this is to jump on your horse and then head forward, let the debris tank the first hit, and move to the second. After that, head forward to the right, down the slope, and then behind this dune, and then just kind of wait until he stops shooting stuff at you. There is this attack which he can do where he shoots arrows in the air which follows you. You do need to respect that and run away until it stops. Now, summoning. Do you do it? I say no. I think it actually makes the fight harder at RL1. Yes, it takes the heat off you, but he also becomes much harder to hit because he zooms around on his horsey to the other NPCs, forcing you to chase him. He also has really big sweeping attacks, and he'll often switch aggro really quickly. If you do want to summon, I found the best option was to get occasional jump heavies off when it is absolutely safe, and then wail on him when he's staggered, rather than go for a riposte. A couple things to watch out for. This combo has a very specific directional dodge pattern. If you do dodge the wrong way, you can get frame trapped and killed. Also, watch for when Radahn gets off his horse and lunges at you. You can get a couple easy charges on him before he does a get off me attack. At about 75%, he will do this gravity attack, which is safe to punish if you're at his butt. After that, if you reposition yourself to his front, you can bait out another big attack, which can be easily punished again. If your attack is strong enough, this could make him phase change, which can again be punished. His meteor attack is actually very easy to deal with. When he goes into the sky, keep your camera on one spot on the horizon. He will come back from that location. You don't need to spin the camera around to look for him. That's where he'll drop in. To watch out for this move, he'll charge forward and you'll have to run in the opposite direction and then head back towards him to jump over the wave. The Serpent Hunter here does pretty respectable damage at max, but the Rusted Anchor, ooh. If you want to get this guy down, I say this is the weapon to do it with. When I first beat Radahn at level 1, it was the first time that I realized that I might actually be able to beat the whole game like this. And if you've done this, you can too. Big pat on the back. And we've unlocked a significant part of the map now, so head on into that big ol' hole. Head all the way down the path until you meet the toughest boss in the game, you. You can unequip your weapon and then re-equip it when you enter if you really want the fight to be a stomp, but the Mimic Tier is a clone of you in every way, so it will be dust in a couple hits. Once you're done with that, and you're down in the Ancestral Woods, we have the option to take on one more Remembrance boss, so let's do that. The Regal Ancestor Spirit is really a pretty simple fight. It's weak to slash, fire, and holy, meaning an infusible slash weapon with Flaming Strike or Sacred Blade is going to go crazy here. Its status resistances are super high, but it doesn't really matter because its HP is super low, and it has that low HP to compensate for the fact that it heals. Really, any weapon choice here will be fine, but elemental infusions with the Scorpion Charms and the Tears will do a lot. It does have a super spindly model though, so you may want a weapon that covers a lot of space so you don't whiff. Flaming Strike is really good for that. You do really have to respect the blue goo. Strafe it and stay away until it clears. This move, where it jumps in the air a few times and then jumps down, is just a simple timing check, which doesn't take too long to memorize. The other one to keep in mind is when it rams its horns at you. This is a combo that will extend, so just wait and then punish. Other than that, the only thing I'd tell you to watch out for is when you're behind it. It can kick you in the head, but that's really it. This one should be in the bag. After that, you can head to the Eternal City, eventually picking up the Black Whetblade. This one gives you the bleed infusion, which is massive. So many bosses are weak to bleed, including a little someone that's coming up pretty soon, so this is very handy. Keep going and pick up the item to finish Rani's quest and continue that quest line along. You'll have to do the inverted carrion manner, which is actually really annoying at RL1. You can Giants Hunt Big Hat to death, but you could also just run past everything and bum rush to the elevator if you're confident in your footwork. You'll get the Stargazer Talisman to help out with some intelligence stats. Keep following that quest line all the way down to the Ansel River main, and you can pick up the Wing of Astel, and this one requires quite a bit of intelligence and dexterity to wield, but it isn't a problem with your Physic, Headpiece, and Talismans. This weapon is insane with stagger and has a really strong ranged heavy, so it's a great pick for some of the bosses coming up. You'll find Blade further on. Giant's Hunt is amazing here, as always. Keep going until you get to the Lake of Rot. Here, you can pick up a couple things. The Mushroom set will help you if you're doing a Poison or a Rot build, as the bonus stacks with your Talismans. Once you raise the platforms, you can also fight this guy right here for a new weapon. This weapon is no joke, one of the strongest weapons of the game. The Asher War is fine, but the real reason this is so good is because of the Charged Heavy, which does as much damage as a colossal weapon, but is much faster and consumes way less stamina. The other great thing about it is that it does gravity damage, and you know who's weak to gravity damage? Astel is one of those bosses that can be really annoying if you do low damage because he is often teleporting away from you to shoot things from far away. He can also teleport above you and dive down, so when he teleports, it's a good idea to unlock the camera and look around to make sure he's not going to swoop. He's not too difficult, but he can be if you don't respect him. He has several extremely lethal get-off-me attacks. It's best to just run out. If he attacks with his tail and you're at his face, you pretty much have free reign to wail on him because it's just going to go over your head. Astel is weaker to physical damage and weak to all statuses except cold, which he's immune to. You can always get in a Charged Heavy after a stagger and still get the riposte, and then you can get another one after. I found it wasn't too bad to spam roll the Meteor Shower and get a big punish, but later I found out if you just run to the left or right in a straight line, it will miss you pretty consistently. I used the Antspur Rapier with Poison Fusion as well. I thought this would be good because there is a great deal of time where you can't attack him safely, and that was pretty spot on. This was really good, and he died from poison while the meteor went off. Recommended. Be aggressive when it's safe, but respect his get-off-me moves, and this should be fine. The simple option, though, is not to deal with the get-off-me options at all, and instead play at range. Although Astel is immune to cold, you can infuse Ice Spear with magic and do pretty respectable damage very safely. Definitely use this option if you're really having trouble, but even in melee, this guy isn't as tough as he looks. Afterwards, continue up the elevator and pick up some high-level smithing stones. If you've already got the higher-level stones in Caelid, the subterranean Shunning grounds, and near Mohg, you should have all the stones required to upgrade all the way to plus 24. You can now max that weapon out if you follow Selen's questline and side with Jaren at the end. Choose wisely which weapon you'd like to use this on, because it is going to be a little while before you're going to be able to max another one. And we're going to use this weapon to take on Mohg. You may be thinking that's wild to take him on right now, that's a late game boss, but we're at max now with all the talisman slots we're going to get, so we're not getting any stronger, and we really want access to the DLC for some extremely helpful resources. If you don't have access to the DLC, feel free to do Mohg later or skip it completely, but I'm going to do it now. A couple things first though, if you are planning to use bleed, which you probably should, you can pick up the white mask. All you need to do is just giants hunt this guy to oblivion. That's going to give you a bonus to your damage after bleed procs. You can also stack that with a talisman, but to do that, you need to fight Edgar near the lobster pit. Now, Edgar is a nightmare at level 1 because of the dogs, but here's a very handy hint. If you use the beast repellent torch, which you can get from the vendor in Dragon Barrow, you can hold it in your left hand to keep the dogs where they are. Then, just switch to your main weapon and giants hunt Edgar. Killing him will make the doggies disappear and you'll get your talisman. Easy peasy. We are ready. Now it's time to take on the Lord of Blood himself. Obviously Mohg is weak to bleed, and we've picked up some tools that can help us with that. That can absolutely break this encounter and essentially let us skip Mohg if we really want to. But do you want to? If you watched my Lost Art video, I went through one of my strategies of fighting Mohg with Carrion Retaliation and Wild Strikes on the Jawbone Axe. And this was really strong because it let me deal with the blood splatter, allowing me to stay aggressive, and also deal enough damage with bleed that he didn't heal much after Nihil. But there are other options, of course. I tried the fight out with just the regular old Serpent Hunter we've been taking through the game. It's really good for getting pokes even while the blood splatter is going off because of its range. It let me get free damage off anytime he did that move. The best way to maximize your damage in this fight is to play around Nihil. You can get a charged heavy anytime he counts, as long as you go around the back of him. If you stay in front, you'll get a whack. This means if you play it right, you can stagger after the second count, go behind him while he recovers, get a whole massive charged heavies off in a row, leaving him in a pretty rough state for phase 2. As a test, I didn't use the purifying tear on this run and found that it really wasn't that rough to deal with, even with Sore Seal. If you heal the first and third and tank the second, you can even squeeze in some extra damage. You'll lose 3 flasks, but you're not getting much use out of them anyway. Honestly, I'd recommend using the tier slot for something you'd get more use of. Second phase is where things get really tricky. His different attacks now also do a blood splatter, and you need to pay attention to the trajectory and dodge accordingly. This can completely change the direction you dodge his moves in the second phase, which can mess you around a bit and force you to relearn them. He also has a whole bunch of new moves and several variations within them. Now he won't just charge at you with his trident, he'll charge past you, and he'll often follow that up with a very quick attack. His fork shockwave will now be much larger and can't be strafed anymore, it needs to be rolled. There is also a swoop move he does that has a shockwave as well that needs to be rolled in the same way. And this swoop move can be tough because there are 2 variations with different dodge timings. The tell is him either fluttering in the air before diving or coming straight down. If you have Mohg phase 1 down, you're already on the right track. Once you get those new moves down, you'll get them just fine. If you really start to tear your hair out and you just want to get to the DLC, you can just shackle him and really mess him up. It's that easy. But if you enjoy Elden Ring for the pleasure of overcoming tremendous odds, Mohg is one of the best examples of that. Okay, DLC time. There's a lot I won't cover. Bottom line is, if it's good in a normal run and it doesn't have crazy stat requirements, it's probably good at level 1. So here we go. First off, you're going to find a bunch of blessings around. If you follow me here, totally fine if you use them. It doesn't conflict with the level 1 run at all. If you use them, you're still a onebro. You can get most of the blessings in the game without fighting anything, so if you want to be really strong in the DLC really early, feel free to check out one of the many guides online that can show you a good route. Let's get some talismans. Blade of Mercy is picked up pretty much immediately. It's a must for pretty much any build doing lots of riposte. Anytime you want to do big staggers or parries, this. Two-handed sword talisman is a must, self-explanatory. This is a huge source of damage if you're two-handing. Twin Turtle Talisman is easy to get. It's a direct upgrade. Definitely pick this up. From the Grace Point in the Cerulean Coast near the Big Hole, you can make a couple jumps to get this very important cookbook. This is going to help you against the duo. These are the Eternal Sleep Pots. These are much easier to farm, and they're infinite. You can get a bell for the white flesh mushrooms near Elec River, and that'll speed up the crafting process even more. Speaking of crafting, head on past the church and find this little critter. Do not kill this man. Give him a warming stone and he'll perk right up. Head back to Grace to give him some time to get his bearings and head on back to him for a cookbook. But it's not this cookbook we're after. For that, we need to talk to Morgott. He'll give us Forager Cookbook 7, which allows us to craft a consumable which lets us charm enemies. This will come in handy in one upcoming fight in particular. The cookbooks are good, people. Use them. Let's talk weapon choices. Some easy to get weapons with low stat requirements are the Great Katana, Backhand Blades, and Milady. They're out in the open, don't require killing anything, and they're all really good. If you defeat this guy down south by the church, you can get the Black Steel Great Hammer. This one, like the Clayman's Harpoon, has inbuilt holy damage, but it can be infused. It's really good for holy builds, which a good deal of the DLC is weak to. It also has boosted guard counters, so it's really great for the deflecting hard tier, which you can get from this golem right at the start. These guys suck to kill, but no more than on a normal run. The deflecting hard tier is fantastic. At level 1, it's borderline broken. To make it even stronger, you can get the curved sword talisman back in Stormveil to boost those guard counters even more. Inside the Shadowkeep, you can get the Carrion thrusting shield, which is really strong if you want to be more defensive. You can also farm the regular Mesmer Soldier enemies for two incredibly underrated weapons, the Mesmer Soldier Axe and the Mesmer Soldier Spear. Like the Alabaster Lord Sword, the Axe has insane charged heavies. The Spear is also fantastic. It has a charged heavy that hits twice, making it great for status builds and also great for Royal Knight's Resolve. In Ballarat, Giants hunt Queiline to death. Then you can get Shriek of Sorrow, which is an insanely good Asher War to use with Red Feather Branch Sword and the Twin Bird Kite Shield. This can boost your damage up to 50%. Insane. Get the Well Depths key and head to the sewers. If you sprint all the way to the right, you can get the Poison Hand here, which will boost your Poison Rot builds even more. You don't even need to equip it to get the boost. Put it in your offhand and forget it. It has low weight, so it's really free damage if you're using that setup. You don't need to meet the requirements. Next, head back to the church again to Giants Hunt Queiline for an amazing Asher War that is basically like Giants Hunt, but instead of flipping them up in the air, it applies a fire buff like Flaming Strike. Near the cathedral, you can find Carrion Sovereignty, which, you'll see. You can farm these horned fellas and the Curse Blade dudes for these headpieces, which will give you a pretty massive boost of stats at really low weight. The pain is farming them. Do it if you need to, but don't tear your hair out over it. You can also farm these birds for their helmet, which gives really good stats. You can also get their shoes, which gives extra power to kicks. If you pair that with the Shattered Stone Talisman, you can get more kick power and then use that with Poison Flower Blooms twice. I call it the Dirty Birdie. The last few things do require us to kill some things. They can be tough, but with a bit of Giants Hunt and a bunch of blessings, it's not too bad. If you go down the secret path from the Shadow Keep, you'll get to Rakshasa. You'll require a fair bit of the old Giants hunting, but the set you receive as a reward is a pretty massive boost. If you don't care about losing light roll or looking pretty, each piece is a damage boost, both giving and receiving. Since you're a wet paper bag, that hardly matters, so it's a great set at level 1. You can head down here to see the Dragon Man and Giants hunt him for the Dragon Hunter Great Katana. This is really great for killing the dragons in the open world, which reward us with more max level stones. Okay, that's enough. We're loaded up. Let's get on with it. Back to the base game. We're continuing with the mandatory bosses. It's time for Morgott. I did a big video detailing my own learning process with Morgott, and you can see that video here. In that video, I learned the fight using a pretty weak weapon, but some very strong tools. I parried him and used the deflecting hard tier. I definitely wouldn't recommend parrying Morgott. He's got some really weird quirks when you parry him. Deflecting hard tier, however, was really good. And if you have that, I would definitely recommend it. If you don't, no stress. Morgott can be solved with a very similar strategy to Margit, staying at mid-range and coming in when he has a delayed attack to strafe and punch. Unlike Margit, Morgott is actually significantly easier in Phase 2 because he has more of these delayed attacks. You can also absolutely skip Phase 2 completely. Morgott has some thresholds with his spears and his phase changes, and if you strategize with the shackle, you can really abuse those thresholds for scripting. I've mentioned scripting previously. This is where you abuse a boss's pre-programmed moves to force a rhythm. If you do want the challenge, check out the Mind Over Morgott video for more tips, but if you just want him gone, feel free to wipe the floor with him. Now that Morgott is more gone, we've opened up another massive area of the map. But first, if you did the Nepheli Lu and Kenneth Haight questlines, you can go back to Stormvale to get some handy max level upgrade stones. We're about at that point where having a fully upgraded weapon is pretty much expected, so it's a good idea to have a few options for weapons so that we're equipped for a variety of situations. Once those stones are in hand, activate the lift. You can immediately check out the Zamor ruins next to the Grace Point for a new smithing stone bell. Very handy if we want to upgrade a new weapon to use our max stones. We will be stuck with limited 7s and 8s for a little while though, so choose wisely. In the Big Lake, you can attack the invisible bug for seppuku. This is a fantastic Ashawar if you're going whole hog on a bleed build. It's very strong. Next, you can make your way all the way to the church near the fire giant. You'll get invaded by Okina. You can giants hunt him to hell, but he can still be really annoying. When you do get him down though, you can get his face, and his face gives you a pretty nice bonus to dexterity. So it's a great alternative to the Curseblade Mask if you can't be asked farming it. After Okina has been dealt with, you can head up to the skull right above you for another easy ancient smithing stone. There's a few other things we want to do in the mountaintops, but let's take a quick intermission back down the deep root depths and take down another remembrance boss. But before we do that, we need to fight a boss that no one really likes, Fear's Champions. What you're going to want to do first, if you haven't already, is to make sure you're playing offline. If you're online, the random NPCs are modeled after real players in the game. So sometimes they're tissue paper and sometimes they're gods. Playing offline makes them much more consistent and manageable. Rogier isn't too bad if you get a good Giants Hunt run on him, but he does have a habit of being very evasive. The real trouble, though, is the third fight, when you have to fight 2 random NPCs and Lionel. Lionel will summon these ghosties, and when you're at level 1, you need to respect those ghosties and not attack when there's a chance they can hit you. But you also need to space these guys out, so if you Giants Hunt, they don't clip you on the back of the head. Meaning if there's 2 clumped together, it's really risky to attack, and if there's ghosties, it's really risky to attack, and rarely is there a time when neither of these things are happening. You can super boost your damage with buffs to nuke at least 1 down at the start to make things a little easier, but the name of the game here is patience. Just pick your moment, be safe. While it's time consuming and pretty boring, it's not difficult as long as you take your sweet time. Keep at it, be patient, you'll get them eventually. When you finally finish, you're rewarded with another fairly controversial fight. It's time for Fortissax. Fortissax gets a lot of hate. I really don't think he's that bad, but it really depends on your playstyle and what you're choosing to restrict yourself with. If you are 100% melee only, no ranged Ashawar, swinging big sword only, yeah, this could suck for you. If you allow yourself Ice Spear, this could be one of the easier bosses of the run. This does insane damage and it's very simple. All you need to do is keep it range and keep his head locked on, stay clear of the black clouds and watch the waves. When you've got that red fuzz on you, then you need to keep moving because it will eventually spawn on top of you and could likely kill you. It spawns on you when you're underneath him, so watch out. Because Ice Spear is fast and you'll always be moving, it's not so much of a problem. It is incredibly good on this boss, but we can do better. I'm going to show you something a little wild. I'm on New Game Plus on this character, meaning Fortissax currently has 25% more health than usual, and I'm not nearly as strong as I could be. I'm not using any buffs. Watch this. I'll play it on double speed for the sake of time. That was like 5 hits. That's crazy. So if you're having trouble with Fortissax, I mean, do that. But I know what you're saying, that's cheese. What do I do if I'm restricted to a melee playstyle? What if I'm not using Ashes of War? Well, I've got you. It's not gonna go nearly as smoothly, but I've got you. We've got 2 options. One is we wait for big opportunities to go for his head, or we go for the death of 1,000 cuts option. For the head option, you're waiting for your opportunity to get one massive hit in. For that reason, Royal Knight's Resolve should be your go-to. All dragons are pretty reliably weak to pierce, so a Great Spear is a great option. Pair that with some buffs or the Red Feathered Brand Sword and you've got some big burst. I use the Mesmer Spear, and if you run straight up to Fortissax at the beginning, you can get a jump heavy for massive damage. For more of these, and he's probably toast. But you do really have to pick your moments. For this option, you're going to want to stay in front of him at all times, and if he gets too close, cross over to the other side of him. Fortissax is weak to status, so you can just slice away at his legs and try to get some procs off. The issue is, with that, you will constantly have the red lightning on you because you're underneath him. You will again need to keep crossing over and then back again in order to stay safe. Both options require patience. They also require very good movement and, most importantly, aim. I suck at that. Fortissax is spindly as hell. I spent a good deal of the time using these options missing, to be honest, so if you think you'd have trouble with that or you have issues using the camera in fights like these, I'd recommend going the easier route with one of the ranged options. I didn't, however, and went with the Antspur Rapier, and I got him down just... Screw it. Another Remembrance boss down. There is another big optional area we can start to explore for lots of goodies, but I think it's a good time now to get back to the mandatory bosses because there's one really important item that we need. So let's do it. Fire Giant time. Fire Giant was on my first level 1 run in the top 3 fights that took me the longest to get down. He's known as the Run Killer, and he can be really annoying. I'm going to show you a range of options to help you take him down. All of these are really strong and should give you a leg up. The name of the game here with Fire Giant is to unlock your camera and look up to get a better sense of timing. A good deal of the frustration of Fire Giant is not seeing what he's doing because his model is so big. I used to find Fire Giant incredibly difficult, but now I actually find him one of the easier bosses, and I think that pretty much all comes down to how much I've improved operating the camera. If you haven't cracked moving your camera while sprinting or playing unlocked, you're gonna need to practice for this fight. Fire Giant is weak to slash damage. He's also fairly weak to all status effects, except cold. A weapon with high stagger is really good here. He'll take a long time to recover after you break the braid on his foot, meaning high stagger can pretty much script the first half of the fight. After getting stunned from breaking his ankle, he will always send out these slow-moving fire orbs. The best way to deal with these is to get on Torrent and wait until they're spawned. Then sprint past them on the horse, making them explode. Then turn around and engage him again. You really have to respect that move. In the second phase, walk slightly forward and Fire Giant will very nicely put his hands directly in front of you to wail on. If he doesn't stagger from this, he'll follow this move usually with this volcano thing where he'll stay stationary and erupt up into the air. It's pretty safe just to run up to his leg and charge more heavies. This will most likely stagger and you can get an attack on the eye before you riposte. This will probably put him very low, if not dead already, so the second half of the fight is also really easily scripted if you have enough damage. If you don't have enough damage, then it's really a thing of finding opportunities to go behind him and wail on his foot to try and get more staggers. Fire Giant has no negation for either magic or lightning, making split damage builds really good here. I used Lightning Slash on the Godskin Peeler, and it did a whole bunch of damage. Both poison or bleed builds would also be fantastic in phase 2 with his boosted defenses. The other option, if you really wanted to just blast right past him, is Carrion Sovereignty. This Ash slaps him. It has a massive amount of stagger and damage, and because he spends so much time stationary, you can get it off completely free in phase 1 and phase 2 multiple times. If you're having a ton of trouble with Fire Giant and you have access to the DLC, this is what you want to use because it will make the fight pretty trivial. However you do it, it's done. Getting Fire Giant is a massive achievement. Pat yourself on the back because you have now finished the mid game. It's late game, baby. This is the stuff you probably struggled with even on a high level character. It's tough, but I'll do my best to get you through it. The good news is that in the late game, we don't have too much running around to do. We only really have a couple areas that we need to explore and collect goodies in. Other than that, late game is essentially a boss rush. So, let's get into it, burn that Erd, and let's get to Farum Azula. The first half of Farum Azula is pretty painless to sprint through. Just run past everything until you eventually get to the grace point before what could be the biggest headache of this run. But it doesn't have to be. I think it's perfectly fine to pretty much skip it using sleep pots and bleed. If you land your sleep pots, then you can go the entire fight without even having to avoid an attack. If you are worried about this fight, don't be if you are willing to cheese it. If you're not willing to cheese it, yikes. This is going to be a time. You can summon Banal for extra help, but if you're unwilling to sleep them, you're probably unwilling to summon, so I don't know. If you're crazy enough to do this fight without sleep, yeah, it's gonna be fucking awful. I'll say that much. Big respect to anyone that does the fight like that. Maybe one day I'll do the same, but today is not that day. After the fight, we'll get what we really came here for, which is the last Smithing Stone Bell. This will allow us to upgrade infinite weapons all the way to 24. You should have a few extra max ancient smithing stones if you've been following this guide, so feel free to get some more weapons for your late game arsenal. There's a few more max stones in Farum Azula if you feel the need to get some more. There are also a bunch in the DLC that can be gotten pretty easily as well without killing anything. You can activate the elevator here and climb up all the way to reach Alexander if you haven't already killed him and finish the questline for the Alexander Shard. Whatever you do, don't do what I did and kill him before you exhaust all his dialogue. That will ruin your life. Double back to the staircase before the elevator and go down. Eventually you'll get to this grace point and you will have in front of you the dreaded Bird Gauntlet. This takes real finesse. You can use Assassin's Gambit to make things a little easier on yourself, but it won't be easy. You'll have to do a lot of ducking and weaving. Once you jump up to the dragon, you can just run past him to get an ancient somber stone, and this will make the dragon fly away, giving you a clear path. The danger isn't over yet though, so be on your guard. But once you do get to the elevator, you're in the clear. Thank Christ. You can get the Draconic Tree Sentinel out of the way now if you'd like. He's exactly the same as the last one, but with more health, so the same strategies apply. He's on a bit of a ramp, which makes it a little awkward, but if you got him down before, you'll get him down here as well. Now we're pretty much ready for the final stretch. You can take on Maliketh right now if you'd like, but I'm going to open up the last big area of the map and clear it out so that we have a boss rush to finish things off. We want to get to the consecrated snowfields. We need to take down Nile. Nile can be really tough. This is why we got that cookbook in the DLC. The Charming branch is an AoE. So if you trigger it on the knight, you'll also charm the other one at the same time. This will let you start the fight in a really strong place because both of them will wail on Nile while you can just hang back and chuck ice spears at him. If you don't have this item or you don't have the DLC, things are a bit tougher, but if you have Ice Spear, it's still pretty manageable. Back up and spear down the two soldiers one by one. Once the soldiers are dead, you'll start phase 2 and you'll do a long wind-up animation to get there. That gives you even more opportunities to chuck ice spears and get him even lower. This will most likely stagger him and put him pretty much halfway dead. Then it's just a matter of playing keep away. If you stay at range, he'll pretty much always loop this lightning move, which is really easy to dodge. Just keep backing off and chucking ice spears to keep him in the loop. I did this on New Game Plus and it was perfectly manageable. If you're doing a run with lots of restrictions, this could be really tough, but with the right tools, this is a breeze. And with that, you'll have the other half of the medallion, so you're ready to head to the consecrated snowfield. If you head up all the way to the tippy top, you can get to the tree man, who you can defeat for the thorny cracked tier. This will boost your builds with consecutive attacks. Things like the Godskin Peeler, or Power Stance weapons, or the Milady would do very well to use this. Next, we'll need to open up the way to the Haligtree. If you know the way, you can pretty much just sprint your way through with no issue. Your one big problem moment is this bit right here with the archers on the roof. This bit sucks. Assassin's Gambit can help you through and make it a bit easier, but it still requires a bit of finesse on the platforming. If you have a great bow, you can actually shoot this archer down. If not, you just might have to keep at it until you get past her. She is pretty annoying. Once that's done though, the rest of the shrines are very easy to light up, and then you'll have the way forward through to the Haligtree. This gauntlet down the tree to the next grace can be a real headache. Once you make it to this grace point though, it's a pretty clean run all the way to the shortcut before Loretta. Loretta is very similar to the last time you fought her, but with some extra magic shenanigans. On the whole though, the strategy is the same. You'll now have carry and retaliation though, so not only can you parry her, but you can reflect her spells for more damage. But just like Draconic Tree Sentinel, this is a fight you've probably already done, and there's nothing really new other than the fact she has more damage and health. It's a pretty clean run right through to the grace point before Malenia. You can stop off on the way to get Marika's Saw Seal if you want to use a weapon with some funky stat requirements, or you just want to be the coolest guy around rocking double Saw Seals. Once you're finally at the bottom, light the grace point, and we are done here. We won't take on Malenia just yet, but we have done the legwork. That's pretty much all the running around we'll have to do. From now on, this is a boss rush right to the end. There are a bunch of other max stones we can pick up if we ever feel the need to get a new weapon, but no more sprinting away from enemies to get between grace points. All that's left now is to die over and over again to the hardest bosses in the base game. You've got this. Placidusax, unfortunately, doesn't classify as either a dragon or an ancient dragon, so the Dragon Hunter Great Katana won't help us out here. The Lion's Greatbow does do work and allows for a safer playstyle at range. It does really amazing stagger, so it's a good option if you really want to play safely. I do think, though, it's an easier fight up close. As safe as it is at range, his claws aren't really a huge issue. The most annoying move is the red lightning that spawns that forces you to continue moving like Fortissax. Because you need to stand still for so long to shoot the Lion's Greatbow, it can be really risky unless you time it really carefully. Like all dragons, Placidusax is weak to pierce, but unlike Fortissax, he's very resistant to status effects. That being said, you do get a lot more opportunities to get hits in, so Antspur Rapier is still great here to proc rot and let that tick away while he's flying around and going invisible in phase 2. My preferred option though is to go for really big hits with Shriek of Sorrow or Royal Knight's Resolve. Mesmer's Soldier Spear is really great for that. Run out for the lightning, then just run back in again and charge a heavy. Placidusax is a lot easier to maneuver around than Fortissax. If you're in front, he very often does this claw move, which you can very easily roll past and then sprint to his tail. He'll always follow that with a fire breath, which you can easily avoid if you just keep running and then continue attacking the tail from the other side. The other thing to watch out for is when he gets out the red lightning spear. This is a massive AoE and you want to respect it and get the hell out. You can use Raptor of the Mists or Vow of the Indomitable to more easily avoid this and stay in the fight, so if this move is knocking you down consistently, it might be an option to consider. In phase 2, he'll zip around a lot and be much more unpredictable. Play it safe and hang back until he stops teleporting and just keep trying to get around to his tail. The big problem move with Placidusax is the lasers. What you actually want to do when he's flying around is to move as close as you can to the edge of the arena, so that when he does the laser move, you can go behind him for big punishes. If he starts doing the laser though, and he is nowhere near the edge of the wall and you can't get behind him, the name of the game is distance. You want to be as far away from him as possible and just spam roll, really. Honestly, that seems to work for me okay, but it's not consistent. If you're really struggling, Vow of the Indomitable will help you out. Placidusax is actually deceptively simple. If you have low damage, it can be a long fight, but with a little patience, this is very doable. Now, back to the mandatory bosses. Maliketh gave me a ton of trouble on my first RL1 to the point that I pretty happily cheesed him. It wasn't until I did my video recently learning him properly that I figured out how he works, and now I have a much easier time with him. What I realized is that if you stay at the mid-range and bait out this full combo, he will do this move, which is very easy to punish with a charged heavy. If you're too far away or too close, then he will not do this, so it takes some very specific positioning to get it. If not, you may find yourself constantly chasing him with little opportunity to get a big attack in. Maliketh doesn't really have any standout physical or elemental weaknesses, but he does have very low resistances to poison and scarlet rot, so a build utilizing that is very strong. I used Poison Flower on the Mesmer Soldier Spear, and it was really good. A good deal of his attacks can also be jumped over, which means you can do some really tricky stuff with this Ash. If you're still really having trouble with phase 1 and this trick of baiting him into this combo isn't working, you can play his game and play at ranged. Ice Spear is incredibly good here, and if you want an easy way out, this is it. When second phase starts, if you move just back and to the right, just this little bit to the edge of the circle, and then roll forward on his first attack, you can get a couple charged heavies here every time. Without fail, it's scripted. This could steamroll you through and skip the whole phase if you have enough damage and time your staggers. I actually learnt this in the last Maliketh video, but I had to cut it out because unbeknownst to me, I kept triggering a bug that stopped this from happening. It turns out there is this very strange bug with certain bosses where if you riposte them and that damage puts them into phase 2, instead of starting the new phase in this scripted position, you'll stay where you were when you triggered the riposte, and that can really mess you up. For that reason, I really recommend for Maliketh, Godfrey, and DLC Radahn, you don't phase change them with a riposte. If you get a stagger, and it's likely the damage will tick them over into the next phase, do a charge instead. It's safer, and you'll probably get a bigger punish if you know what to expect at the start of the phase. Maliketh's second phase is actually much easier than the first. It may seem harder because he has much more flamboyant attacks, but the solutions to these attacks are pretty simple. Often if you just roll the first attack of the combo, you can just get free damage off like you did at the start of the phase. The really scary ones are when he perches on his sword and then starts cartwheeling towards you, but all you need to do is just run to his butt and charge some heavies. Now if you head down left of the Grace Point before Maliketh, you'll be invaded by Banal, and if you Giants hunt him down, you will get this lovely little claw. And this claw can be used to parry Maliketh in phase 2 when he jumps in the air. The moment to press the button is when you see this yellow flash. Definitely give this a go if you haven't already, because this is really satisfying. And with that, we're out of Farum Azula and back to Leyndell. You can head up to the dragon for another max level stone if you still don't have enough, but there's not a great deal of interest around here, so you might as well head right on up to Gideon. Gideon sucks. He just sucks. Obviously, Giant's Hunt is the play here. You can also just poke him while he's casting spells to stop them, but if he gets one off, it's likely he'll get a bazillion more off because he can chain them together really quickly. He's very annoying. On your first attempt with him, you'll get a bunch of time to open with a massive attack while he monologues at you. Then you can just spam Giant's Hunt. Buff up like crazy so you can try to nuke him right at the start of the fight. If you do die though, you'll have a much harder time from there because he'll no longer monologue at you to get a head start. You'll have to make your way to him, dodging spells. Ugh, it sucks. What I would recommend is to back up your save so that if you do die, you can just reload and have an easier time while he's monologuing. Once you get him though, you'll be able to head to my favorite fight in the base game. Godfrey has different weaknesses in phase 1 and 2, making him a bit weird to build around, but like Golden Godfrey, his big weakness is lightning, so split damage is very handy. He's also very weak to poison and rot, and that build would be real nice, especially in phase 2. Phase 1 is pretty much the same as Golden Godfrey with a couple notable differences. At around 75%, he'll do this very slow roar and stomp. He takes way more time with this than you'd think, and you can freely wail on him with charged heavies while he does it. If you don't have the damage to phase change him after this move, all his stomp moves will be arena wide, so you can no longer strafe them. Godfrey has that weird riposte bug, so you don't want to mess around with that because in phase 2 he starts with a lunge that is pretty simple to dodge and punish to get a good head start. From there, things get tougher. Godfrey in phase 2 is scary. His whole thing is punishing panic rolling. He has delays on a lot of his attacks, and he's always advancing on you with grabs and stomps. For that reason, it's often a much better option to sprint away rather than roll. This is much safer than you might think, and it allows you to double back for a jump heavy pretty safely. When he does this roar and jumps in the air, that's your cue to move the hell away. Take that time to buff up a little or heal and then re-engage. After a little while, he'll do another slow stomp, use the opportunity to wail on him. After he does this, just like in phase 1, all his stomp moves will be arena wide, so they will need to be jumped. You can also absolutely cheese him with Ice Spear and just stay at range. That's especially effective in phase 2. I do challenge you though to take on this fight fairly. This fight for me is peak Elden Ring. It's time. This is the one, folks. It's time to talk Malenia. If you've seen my other video about Malenia, you'll know I'm not the biggest fan of her. In that video, I sought to learn how to fight her just with trial and error, no online help or resources, and without any of the tactics I'd previously used to avoid her most troubling move, Waterfowl. Before making that video, I had gotten around Malenia at level 1 by using Frost Pots and the Bloodhound Step. Very viable options, and if you never want to deal with that move, that's a great way to make sure you don't have to. When learning Waterfowl in my previous video, I picked up a few strategies. First, the long range dodge. This is by far the easiest, but it can't be counted on if you plan on playing aggressive, which you should be so you can take advantage of her low poise. For that dodge, you just need to run as far back as possible and then roll forward on the second flurry, then just walk back as she passes over your head on the third. The next one is trickier, the spin. The most consistent way I learnt how to do it is to stay locked on and just strafe, then dodge left at exactly the right time. From there, the second and third flurries are dodged in exactly the same way as the previous method. But if you get caught out mid-attack and you don't have enough time to do that method, you're a little bit stuck. It took me a really long time, but eventually I learnt to unlock the camera so that I could sprint around her, giving me a little extra speed to do the spin method, and that worked, but it took ages to get consistent with it. Since then though, a few commenters pointed out a bunch of other methods, and I've gone back and fought her a few times now. A few in particular pointed out that you can pretty reliably sprint backwards and jump the first flurry, and then continue on the long-range dodge as normal. I managed to get it pretty consistently without much issue, but it only works with some weapons because of the way it shapes your hurt box. If you use a heavier weapon, like a greatsword, your elbows will be higher than your belly button, making this dodge more possible. It's very specific, it's very weird, but it is a great option if you're using a weapon like that. You can also just use Vow, like we did on Rykard. If you use the carry and thrusting shield, you can even put the ash on that so you don't need to worry about switching to one-handing. You just need to vow the first flurry and then roll as soon as it finishes, and then finish the rest of the dodge as normal. But there is something else that I actually much prefer for this fight, and it's actually made me completely change my mind about Malenia. But before I show you that, let's talk about the rest of her kit. Malenia is weak to fire and lightning. She's also very weak to cold and bleed. I tried out Malenia on this fight, and Wing Stance worked extremely well to stay aggressive and quickly jump on top of her. Fighting Malenia requires you to figure out not only when is safe to attack, but also which of her moves are interruptible. And once you figure that out, you can very quickly go from getting your ass whooped to steamrolling her very quickly. And I think that is the most satisfying thing about this fight. It can be a real trap to fear Malenia and hang back so you don't have to deal with a close-range waterfowl, but that can really drag the fight out. You need to find the opportunities to jump on her head even when she's mid-swing. One of the most lethal attacks that she has that a lot of people have trouble with is the flurry. You can parry this move, and it has very generous timing. Parrying against Malenia is a really good strategy in general, but she does take 3 parries to stagger, so it can be a little slow going. If you're not parrying, this move is trickier, but if you're light rolling, it's no trouble. Just spam roll backwards. If you have medium roll though, you will get clipped if you try this. The best option with medium roll is to instead roll forward through the flurry, and then you can get an additional punish. Alternatively, if you have a weapon with range and you're quick, you can just interrupt it. Malenia has 2 different variations of the flurry. Watch out for the final slash. If it's fast, it's not safe and she will follow it up. If it's slow, it's good to go. Give her a big jump heavy. Her kick move isn't interruptible, but it's easy to punish if you just sprint back and then run forward. Just make sure it's a fast attack though, because she will often follow it up. When phase 2 starts, you can just unlock your camera and sprint forward. This reliably lets you just pass right on by. You can take this time to buff up, but what I like to do is keep the Clayman's harpoon as a sidearm and bring it out for some ice spears. This can really start you off on phase 2 really nicely, and if she does it again, she's in real trouble. She'll have most of the same moves as phase 1, but with slight variations. She'll also kick a lot more in phase 2, which can surprise you if you're trying to be aggressive and interrupt her poise. This can make phase 2 feel a lot slower than phase 1 because you can't as easily jump on her head in neutral. A lot of moves that were very safe to punish in phase 1 will now make her jump up in the air in phase 2, and she has a few different things she can do from that position, so it can not only trip you up when you pick wrong, but also stall out the fight. She will often come down and do this delayed rot explosion that can be strafed pretty easily, but the AoE is much bigger than you'd think, so be careful. The other big scary Malenia move outside of Waterfowl is the clone move. This is much scarier than it looks, and I really don't think this is that bad at all. What I figured out in my last video is that you can pretty easily avoid it if you just do this. Roll, roll, beat, roll, 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 spam, roll, just keep rolling. The only timing thing you really need is that slight pause on the 3rd clone. Other than that, it's pretty much just spamming left and back. And that worked really consistently except for the few times that I was too close to the wall and run out of space. That's where that strategy pretty much falls apart, but I found if you space yourself well enough, that doesn't tend to happen too often, so I never really felt the need to find a new method. That works just fine, even if it looks a bit messy. And that's pretty much Malenia's kit. She's got some stuff, but the real difficulty comes from that move. So let's talk about it, because I have had a complete 180 about Malenia, and it's all thanks to a little something called the deflecting hard tier. I used this a lot in my DLC run, but I hadn't tried it on Malenia yet, and in my opinion, it really improves the fight. You can absolutely use it without really any sort of timing or skill to invalidate Waterfowl. If you just spam the guard button during the first flurry and then roll forward and walk back as normal on the 3rd, it's really not that hard at all. And if you really want to be slick, you can even run in on her on the last slash to deflect for a huge guard counter. The trade-off, though, is that although you won't lose health with a perfect deflect, she will heal. And this creates this really interesting push and pull where you have to decide whether you have the space to dodge it or if you want to be safer and just deflect. And that extends to the rest of her toolkit too. One of my main complaints about Malenia is that even if you put aside Waterfowl, I don't find her base kit that fun to dodge in comparison with some of the other bosses. Deflecting her, though, is lots of fun. The guard counters do fantastic stagger, so much so that if you do a charge heavy, followed by a single guard counter right after, is usually enough to stagger her again. I love this playstyle on this fight. It is a revelation for me. It's made me enjoy it so much more. But if this still looks too hard for you, if you've gotten all the way through the game to this point with a little bit of cheese and a cheeky grin, and now you're thinking your luck has run out, I've got news for you, pal. Giant's Hunt. That's right. Malenia can be flipped up into the air. She's not as abusable as regular NPCs, that's probably a good thing, but you can get pretty darn close with the right setup. What you're going to want to do is pick up a greatsword. The Flamberge is the pick I'd recommend because of the native bleed. And what you want to do here is Giant's Hunt into 2 charged attacks. one after the other. And that's going to be a true combo that staggers every single time. Guaranteed. You're going to have a little bit of RNG in phase 2 because she's more likely to randomly kick and get hyper armor from it, and that will make her escape her loop. But this is entirely RNG dependent. If you stick with this strategy and just keep trying to loop and keep your fingers crossed for a good run, it really won't take too long. So if you've been banging your head against Malenia, and believe me, I know the feeling, and you just want to be done with her, this is how you do it. But do at least try the deflecting hard tier if you can, because it really is a game changer. Future One Bros, the hardest boss in the game is down. But you're not done yet, because Radagon and Elden Beast aren't slouches. Radagon is one of my favorite fights in the game, and so much of his moveset is reflective of everything that makes Elden Ring combat so great. Radagon is slow, but he has some pretty long combos. He also has some very sudden attacks, which require some pretty fast reflexes. His moves often have a delayed shockwave that erupts from the ground, so it's usually a good idea to stay behind him and wail on him from the back. He has some moves that can and should be jumped for additional punishes, such as this move when he stomps and then jumps into the air. The next big combo to worry about is the 3 big hammer strikes with the large AoE at the end. You can get a quick hit in between the first 2 and then a very big hit in between the second and third. That should be enough to stagger him out of the last AoE if you're lucky. If not, it requires some very precise timing to dodge behind him at the last second to avoid any damage. Radagon is weak to fire damage. You can take advantage of that if you want, but split damage isn't super helpful against Elden Beast, so you may want to avoid building into that. He's also vulnerable to poison, rot, and cold, but I'd avoid that for the same reason, unless you're planning on swapping your weapon for the second half of the fight. Radagon is, however, very weak to strike damage, which is very handy because there are a bunch of strike weapons that are very good for Elden Beast. Speaking of... You may already know this, but with the release of the DLC, you can now use Torrent in the Elden Beast fight. I was so excited when I heard that because I thought that now we have a viable way to consistently dodge Elden Stars at level 1, and kind of, but not really. You need to dodge it in a very specific way, which is the same way that you would do it on foot. You wait a bit, then sprint on Torrent past him to the right, and then as far as you can back. Torrent helps you get into position faster if he starts casting it when you're nowhere near him, but there's a huge downside. Because the danger isn't just Elden Stars itself, but what he's doing during it. If you're on Torrent when he does these golden sword waves, you're in trouble, especially up close. You can dodge these just by running horizontally if you're far enough away, but if Elden Stars is nearby and you don't want to run horizontally because you'll get hit by it or run into an invisible wall, yeah, you're in trouble. Just like Fire Giant and Gaius and any other fights where you can use Torrent, riding around on Torrent for any significant amount of time will get you killed. But it feels worse on Elden Beast because these sword waves are so fast and have such crazy range and tracking. You have to be incredibly fast to dismount and then roll for the whole combo. You should really only be using Torrent for very short bursts of speed, because if you ride around on your horsey for too long, you'll probably be dead. It's a real shame. I was really looking forward to how this would impact the fight. It turns out, really not that much at all. It's an improvement, but it's clearly not designed for this fight, and it often hurts more than it helps. This fight can be a real slog, because a good deal of it is in the randomness of what moves he pairs together with some of his moves that require very specific dodge patterns. You also may not get many opportunities to hit him if he decides to be a real asshole, which he does often. I'm very against the common mindset that combat in Elden Ring is turn-based, but in this fight, it kind of is. You do need to wait for your turn. With the right setup, though, you can get him almost to half health or lower from the very first interaction. Jump heavy to close the distance and then charge a heavy or two. Once he starts to move, run up closer to his side and keep charging heavies. If you time it right, you can get another heavy as he moves away. He has a really, really long time in recovery after a stagger, and you can wail on his chest area for extra damage before you get the riposte. If he's already at half health by this point, he will do Elden Stars pretty soon. He can be staggered out of it, but you have to be really lucky because he needs to be in your face and 1 or 2 hits away from a stagger. Most of the time, he won't be, and you'll have to rush to him to dodge it. The other move you really have to watch out for are the little lasers. You want to look up to get a sense of the direction and then sprint directionally. It's fine on foot or on torrent. On torrent, it's faster, but not recommended because, yeah. Elden Beast has a few get-off-me moves that you really want to respect. Torrent will help you get off him faster and then jump right back in for more punishes. When he brings out the sword to swipe on you, that's your big opportunity to wail on him. It's not a particularly difficult fight. Really, you're just looking for a good run where he treats you nicely. It is, in a lot of ways, a big anti-climax, not only for the game, but also this guide. It is what it is. Sometimes things don't get wrapped up with a pretty little bow. Sometimes it just ends. But it's not really about the end, is it? It's the journey. It's about setting yourself a challenge and then doing all you can to make it happen. Elden Ring is a gauntlet, and to play through it as you have with this tiny margin of error, you've had to play through one of the hardest games ever made, making little to no mistakes. And you did that however way you made it happen. If you're playing along with me, you made it happen. And if you're still thinking whether or not this is possible for you to try, believe me when I say, if I can do it, you can too. And even if this is meaningless in the end, you don't unlock anything, there is nothing extrinsically rewarding about doing this. Setting yourself a challenge with the only reward being the satisfaction of completing it is immensely satisfying, especially when it's really, really hard. It's about proving to yourself that you can do it, and you can do it. I've given you a whole range of options to take on this challenge. However you decide to take it on, keep me posted on how it's going. I'd love to hear it. It means a lot to know you were inspired to do this because of me, and even more to know I helped. So good luck in your runs, and don't you dare go hollow, because as far as we've come thus far, we still have so much more to go. Thank you to my lovely patrons. Thank you to Spencer Moss, Bender, Wastoid, and a very special thank you to Lako. Thank you as well to all the challenge runners that I reached out to go through all this info and make sure it was above board. This was a massive project, so thank you so much for supporting me to make this stuff. Everything from the Patreon goes straight back into the channel and allows me to make more stuff. I put exclusive content on there, so if you'd like to see some of the uncut boss fights from the challenge runs I did to get all this footage, they're on there if you just want to see me beat some big dudes up without my yapping. Thank you again for sticking to the end of this long video. Do all the YouTube things and like and subscribe if you haven't already. It really does make a difference. Good luck if you do end up taking up this challenge, and please, please, please have a great day.